Mm. So, hi everyone. Welcome to the Midtown Scholar Bookstore's virtual event series. My name is Alex. I'm with the Midtown Scholar, and as always, I am live in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania at the bookstore. Thank you for tuning in this afternoon as we welcome Anne Enright and Fiona Shaw to virtual Harrisburg. We have a really fun discussion this afternoon for you. We're happy you're here, so thank you for tuning in. Thank you for supporting the bookstore, and we hope you enjoy the program. As I mentioned before, I'm with the Midtown Scholar Bookstore. We have over 200,000 used and new books across 6 levels, along with a cafe, bakery, and main stage for literary events. If you're tuning in and you're not from Pennsylvania, we'd love to see you at the bookstore sometime in the future. And please check us out at midtownscholar.com.
My name is Erin Schellenberger. I was briefly a barista working for Alex in the bookstore in college, but now I enjoy working as a core company actor for Gamut Theater Group here in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. We are the combined company of the Popcorn Hat Players Children's Theater as well as the Harrisburg Shakespeare Company. Our mission is to tell classic stories in new and exciting ways for the entertainment and enlightenment of children and adults alike. Our vision is a world where all people cherish classic stories and share them with future generations. And Gamut is so excited to be here with these legends today. Thank you for having us.
And at this time, Erin and I would like to introduce our speakers this afternoon to you. Our featured author this afternoon is Anne Enright. Anne is the author of 6 novels, most recently actress. Here it is. This is the one we're here for today. Her previous novel, The Gathering, won the Man Booker Prize, and The Forgotten Waltz won the Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction, and she lives in Dublin.
And Anne will be in conversation today with Ms. Fiona Shaw. Fiona is an accomplished actress and director. She's known for her roles in the film franchise Harry Potter, as well as award-winning TV shows such as Killing Eve and True Blood. For her performance in Killing Eve, she won the 2019 BAFTA TV Award for Best Supporting Actress. She worked extensively with the Royal Shakespeare Company and the National Theatre and has won the Olivier Award for Best Actress and many other awards. In 2020, she was listed by the Irish Times as one of Ireland's greatest film actors. Congratulations.
And of course,
should be reading the Irish Times, Fiona, more.
At last.
Of course, today the novel we're here to discuss is titled Actress. Here it is once again. And with Fiona here, we'll also be discussing acting and theater and film as well. And I have to read just one blurb. This is from our friend down in Washington, D.C., Ron Charles, who writes, quote, Anne Enright writes so well that she just might ruin you for anyone else. Stripped raw of any sentimentality, the result is a critique, a confession, a love letter, and another brilliant novel. Couple quick housekeeping notes before we get started.
First, if at any point in the conversation you have a question for our speakers, please feel free to use the Q&A button towards the bottom of your screen. We love questions from the audience and we want to hear from you. So ask away and we'll try to get to as many questions as possible toward the end of the program.
And lastly, and most importantly, if you enjoy the talk and want to support the bookstore, there's a very easy way you can do that, and that is to purchase a copy of Actress. We do have limited edition bookmarks and signed book plates. Here they are that will go with every purchase. So I'm going to drop a purchase link in the chat room for the book in just a moment. Click on that. It will take you to our website where you can grab a copy of the book, midtownscholar.com. And once again, thank you everyone for tuning in and for your continued support. But at this time, it is my honor to hand it off to Fiona Shaw and Anne Enright.
Thank you so much, guys. So who's going to start, Fiona?
I'm going to start.
Okay.
I'm going to start and say that one of the great phrases in the book was that when late in life, when the mother is being interviewed, I think, she's a bit nervous and she says, this is what I think it's a fantastic phrase. She said, nobody really likes me anymore, which was a little bit paranoid and a little bit true. And I think that is just one of the most phenomenal phrases, and your ability to find phrases that catch the reader and slightly throttle the reader so you entertain, and then you also write about the writer as slightly sadistic, and there is that element. And I just wanted to ask you about that, because actors are
Sadistic.
not
You're
like this.
starting high. My God. Yeah. No. And there are lines in the book about sadism. There is there is a line about the tenderness with which words are put down, and whether there isn't a sadism in there too. And that's a very late night sort of sentence, as you might imagine. But it is something to do with how language possesses and fixes and has a character one way or the other. And she is, the book is interested, but I mean, this is like the end of the conversation, Fiona. The book is interested in sadism. It's interested in the sadism of those men who are also in the book, and how that flowers rather unpleasantly in the second half of the book. And I'm always taken aback by reviewers who say that I'm being mean to characters when I'm just being forensic.
You are forensic, and
I'm just looking at them, and I'm not judging them. There was one, sorry to interrupt, but there was one reviewer said, there's a bomb in the book, and a woman is picked up after the bomb. She's a middle-aged woman. Her handbag is flattened out on the ground, and she's in shock. And the first thing she talks about is her hair. Okay. I know this woman. I know she's worried about her hair. I know she's the shampoo and set generation. She had to go once a week, and the hair was a big deal, and you had to have a hat or a headscarf. And the first thing she thinks about after the bomb is her hair. Now, I think that's pathetic in the nice way, as well as the kind of, that's just who she is. And this reviewer said I was laughing at her, and I was saying, no, is pity out of fashion? I don't know.
Yes, or maybe you're very good at pinioning the gap between people's self-expectation, people's self-image, and then your image of them. I think it's that keeps us so excited. So you say about the mom, that she has a lover which is like having a good role. I mean, it's that the person in the book, like the poor lady on the ground, thinks she's, oh, I've been bombed, but her actual preoccupations are her hair. And I think that's probably the thing that the novel does, that over and over again. And it's both forensic and incredibly entertaining.
Well, when she says about the role, I mean, the book is really interested in personas and the acting we do in our own lives, as well as the acting she does on the stage. So for her, a great romance is a great role, not a role in the hay, but a role as in a Shakespearean role. It is a great performance of, some inner kind of truth. And, acting isn't lying, and performing isn't fakery, even though it's not entirely true. So she performs her love affair as well as being in it.
Maybe you need, opera singers have this too, that you need a kind of bellows. You need a big, I mean, everybody complains about ego, or the actors having ego. It's very hard to get on a stage if you didn't have an ego.
Where would you be?
Yeah, or something. I mean, you don't want to call it ego, and there are very good actors who are not egotistical. But it's, I mean, in a way, what you explore is the offstage life of an actress who, obviously has some fading glory, but also has glory. And she is, you say a very, very good thing about her too, that when at one of her parties in Dublin, this is the mother of the heroine, that the men come, and sometimes they're very nice to her, but underneath you can feel they're jealous of her. And I think that's very good too.
Well, I was looking at the Queen's Gambit, this chess thing recently, and it was a beautiful young woman who beats all these men at chess, and they're immensely gallant, and they kiss her hand, and they give her a round of applause. And I thought, no, every single man she beat at chess hated her, and then said rude and probably sexual things about her afterwards. And that isn't how women, winning works in the world of chess. Although it's a beautiful fantasy that you beat every man in the world and they're all delighted with you. But I just don't think that that's the way. But that word glory, I sometimes say glamour. It is something about living to the fullest, living to your own inner music or inner or outer drama or whatever that is. And I think it almost precedes something like ego. you know. It's something about the rising up of the self. And it is with Catherine Odell in the book, it is her talent. And so what they are envious of rather than jealous of is this kind of flame. And I think that was actually the saddest thing in the book, was how her kind of beauty, her whatever it is, her thing, her glory, provokes a slightly toxic response in those men. And you call it envy. I would call it envy rather than jealousy, because they're not competing with it. They just want to take it down. They just want to soil it a bit, spoil it. They just want, some of
And
them.
the tendency to spoil it. I mean, there's that wonderful thing you say quite near the end of the book, because I was re-looking at that today, which is she went from the age of 25 to 52 in one part, because she'd been trying to play 25 all through her 20s and 30s, and in her 40s, giving mature performances for a 25-year-old, and suddenly she's 52 and too old for
Yeah. I mean, the challenges that female actors have today are legion, but they have always been, and they were worse, And so her roles are stretched like a piece of elastic. I mean, she is really trying to keep younger and younger and younger, without the benefit of all the surgeries that people do now. And then suddenly, so she snaps like an elastic into older roles. She goes from girlfriend to granny, basically.
She does.
When nobody blinks.
And there's a great adventure. I mean, I know this having come from Cork, but there's a great adventure in being an actress, because you find yourself in situations you never anticipated being. And when you write about Dublin being at that time a place that had the smell of the upstairs of a bus, I mean, that's so true. The whole city smelled like the upstairs of a 46 bus. And she, however, had already been to Los Angeles, and she had had these glimpses of another life that never quite rooted her or steadied her. In her case, she had a baby and came back.
Yes, I don't know how it was for you in Cork, but there were glimmers of that kind of transatlantic, romantic possibility already in my childhood. I mean, I look back, I read about it now, and it's things like Carmel Winter, or was it Carmel Snow? Can't remember which. Maeve Brennan. There were glamorous Irish women. It was possible to be a glamorous Irish woman in America, with your Waterford crystal and your Connemara marble ashtrays and whatever other kind of Irishisms.
And somebody says to the mom, to Miss Adele in America, you can be what you like here. You can be whatever it is you miss most, which is marvelous. She said, I miss Ireland. I miss Anu McMaster. I'm tearing around the west of Ireland. But in the end, what she missed was being quite, an early rackety young actress.
Yeah, Ireland is the thing that people miss, though. It's already got nostalgia built into it, even in the name. And I think that's also true of the theatre, that that there is nostalgia already in a role, that something about the performance is kind of asking us about the end of the performance.
Yes.
So we're all dying swans, really. So I don't know. Do you ever reel back from what people ask you to do, though? You say, who do you think I am? When they say, would you play, this, that, or the other? And you have some quite different idea of yourself before they ask. And you say, well, maybe, I could do that.
In general, whenever I'm asked to play anything, I go into a kind of revolt about it. I feel I couldn't do that. And I don't want to do
it. Insulted?
I don't myself. I think there's something very, I'm very reluctant to take on any of it. Now that sounds like, that sounds like your swan dying unnecessarily. It's that I very rarely think, oh yes. Now I must have felt, oh yes, a lot when I was younger, when I could see the roles. But I now feel, oh God, that's going to be humiliating, or so even things like Medea, I had to be backed into doing Medea. I didn't really want to do it at all. I was very glad after I had done it that I'd done it, and it took.
How many people had to gang up to get you to play Medea?
Actually, it was the artistic director of the Abbey Theatre took us out to dinner. He said, by the end of this meal, you will have either agreed to play Hamlet or Medea. And I thought, I'm definitely not playing Hamlet. So by pudding, I had to agree to Medea. I mean, it was like that. I just couldn't face the discomfort of the going into it, and yet I wanted to do it. So I'm talking about a completely, ambivalence, a huge ambivalence about playing it at all. Because once you're in it, it somehow takes you over.
And is it in you or are you in it? Can I ask that question?
Oh, I'm in it. I don't mean it takes you over that when you come off the stage, you start murdering children. Or it's not like that. On the contrary, it's a bit like playing tennis. At the end of a really big match, you're exhausted and you feel great. You feel.
But I mean, are you in Medea or is she in you?
No, it's that the effort to try and find. I mean, I think again,
Because
just
the books are in me. I'm not in the book. That's
you. Yeah. Maybe you're trying to. I think a writer is being forensic and trying to find the book that needs to come out. And I think certainly I'm not trying to put anything on in a part, but it's a very, I don't know how to explain it, except that you have to go through so many failures to get to the thing that chimes with yourself.
right.
That it's not easy. On day one, you just can't see it at all. Or you can see
Wow. But do you not find in a first reading that you could get so much of it and then lose that then? Sometimes that used to happen, as I recall.
You're wrong.
Hmm?
You're usually wrong. And that's very important to be wrong. It's
Okay.
terribly hard to be in agreement about the fact that you're wrong.
Because when Catherine O'Dell comes off stage, Nora says she's exhausted. You could see how depleted she was. And you just said there that you're just so wrecked. What did you say? You're really tired by it.
I mean, you're exhilarated and tired. But and of course, if you're doing it a lot, like if you're on Broadway doing materials, you on a Sunday at the end of the afternoon
Oh my God.
you're sort of a basket case. I used to go to the movies and sip whiskey and Coke, just in a bottle of Coke, just watching a movie. And I can't tell you a movie I saw. And the other thing that I think you get very well about her in the active performance is, I remember my friend Dennis Staunton coming to the National when I was playing the good person in Sichuan. I know you mentioned Mother Courage in your book, but and he came in the afternoon. He was just passing by and he thought he'd come and see me in the interval. I must have been in the interval. And he came in and he opened my dressing room door and he said, "God, you look so lonely." And I was lonely because there's 1,000 people out there. You're running the beginning of this part 2. You're tired. You've got another show that evening. You really don't have much energy for much except just to sit with a cup of tea quietly and wait for that next thing, like being a boxer, So it's full of contradictions because everything that you talk about, the glamour of her life or the wonderful parties around the kitchen table and the cigarettes, there's a pile of loneliness and sort of desolateness. That is even in the act of success of it. The failure of it is another. It's another empty.
And do you find that the 1,000 people out there, that's a fantasy actually. I mean, it's like a fantasy. There's 1,000 people out in the crowd, and something will come from the crowd. Do you find it different than if you're doing it on camera and there'll be 500,000 people watching the thing afterwards?
You don't relate to that at all. Well, you don't really relate to you try and make some of the cameramen laugh sometimes. But I think in the theatre,
you shouldn't really do that. Yes,
you really shouldn't do that because that really is the wrong energy. You should be going to the camera. But when I did Mother Courage, there's a bit in Mother Courage where her son has been killed, or she thinks he's killed, and they drag the body in, and she has to admit that it's her boy or not admit it. Either way, she loses. Her daughter will be murdered and raped if she admits it's him, and if she doesn't, she'd have denied her son, and that's a terrible thing to do. And she stands and she doesn't speak, and they say, "Is this your son?" And there's a pause, and I remember having the most astonishing experience, which is that I'm standing at the Olivier Theatre, which is more than 1,000 people. Actually, it's about 1,200 people, and feeling the silence being absolutely prickly as she chooses which she's going to do. And I felt I was in the audience. I felt I was one of them. So the thing is actually really happening then when you are
amazing. The boundaries of the self so permeable then, because the audience doesn't feel lonely.
No,
the audience feels joined, or I mean, the audience feels the opposite of lonely. I mean, that barrier disappears in the darkness in a really strange and beautiful way.
Yeah,
I actually played Mother Courage.
Now that
I did when I was in school, Fiona.
Did you?
I did, yeah. Well, it's kind of a college.
It's a long play.
It is a goddamn long play with a matinee, and I had a real wagon as well. It's a long story, but I pulled a real wagon, which was it was in Canada. It was from the local museum of anthropology, and they had a prairie wagon, and I pulled the damn thing across quite a large stage, and I put one bit of that into the book, which is, I looked out of she wakes up in the morning, I looked out in the wagon, and a spider had spawned about 500 tiny baby spiders in the canvas of the wagon, and they were all in her hair, in my hair. So I put that as one of the small theatre anecdotes in that, as you know, the wig problem. Wig stories. Theatre is full of wig stories.
Can I ask you though, how much of you is in the book? I was because some of it is so, I couldn't believe it wasn't a memoir, and I thought, I'm sure she never told me her mother was an actress. I'm sure there must be a memoir. It's so brilliantly wears the coat of memoir. But there's one character in it, Laszlo, who she thinks might be her father, the girl, because you know her father is. I know that Laszlo. I knew that Laszlo. Did you know that Laszlo?
No, I made that Laszlo up.
Well,
including the folds down between his nose and his mouth.
Incredible, because there's a Laszlo who is a great friend of a man called Vilmar Sigmund, who is the most famous cameraman in Hungary. And Laszlo is his best friend, and they were very famous. And I thought, she's put Laszlo in the book.
No, I did do some, as I say, sort of research sometimes after the fact. I was interested in the emigre population in Hollywood at that time. You know, Thomas Mann lived up the road, kind of feeling, and so I looked up Laszlo, and I called him Laszlo Molnar, and I googled all the names, as I often. Nearly 90% of the time I Google the names to try and find out if I've done something by accident. So, but there were times when I wished, you know, that stuff was nearly true. I mean, I almost did believe it. I nearly believed it myself by the end of that memoir section, and that was kind of an intriguing kind of entry for me into things that are very shaving close to cliche, because she goes through a number of parts that aren't quite, you know, the girlfriend or the granny, but there's the girl in the dress in the nightie. She does a floaty girl in a nightie, and we all have seen the girl on the nightie on stage. The Abbey has a girl in a nightie every 6 months. They have nighties in the costume room. Available for levitating girls and girls who just, you know, whatever. So those tiny little whatever I don't know what you'd call them. They're almost cliches. I'm amazed at Laszlo though. Did he live? I set him in Italy.
Yeah. I mean, that's just, well, you've solved that one. But you mentioned things like Anna Manahan's husband dying.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Oh, he did. He died in Egypt.
I didn't know that. So that you have put in some truth.
Yeah, no, there are very few, and that's real Irish theatre lore. And there's you know, Annie McMaster is a real character, and Anna Manahan they went in 1956, I think, Micheál MacLiamore and Hilton Edwards to Egypt, and Anna Manahan was on honeymoon with her husband as a young actor, and he died of I don't know, and that was a great tragedy for her. But also these are tiny little stories that I love so much. Edmund Ball was not allowed to go on that tour by his mother. She wouldn't give him the £50 out in Corbourne Lane in Shankill, and he took an axe to her. Oh no, it was I was in Monkstown. So, in Booterstown, he took an axe to her because he wasn't allowed to go on that theatre trip. And these little anecdotes had been set. I didn't put it in the book, but he threw her body into the sea in Corbourne Lane. And these things hang on. It's like, it's that my mother went to the theatre and saw those people in the gate and in the Abbey, and it's somehow very local. It's a tradition that I take the bus to. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's so it's not quite history. It's a salted anecdote.
Yeah, but some
which
of it
theatre is good at too, you know.
There's creepy history in it, and I don't know whether you could throw light on. It doesn't have to be autobiographical, but the thing of students having affairs with lecturers was a huge part of of Irish university life.
Sometimes quite cheerfully, although you're not allowed to say so. But you know, I mean, it was always a bad thing.
Yes.
But it wasn't always lifted into consciousness that this was perhaps a bad idea by the time. Yeah, um, there are some lines from Professor Duggan that were thrown at me in my,
Yeah. Yeah.
my clever youth.
Yes. There's a
They're
mark
still-
where, having slept with him, the following day she sees him in the house and he says, "Is that yourself?"
Yeah, actually, she
David
doesn't.
Eve.
I didn't want to confuse matters there. So she's actually out of college a few years before. I mean,
Yes,
it's
yes, by the time,
inappropriate at
yes.
every level, but she doesn't realize the inappropriateness of it, or realize the exploitative nature of it until
Yeah.
much later. And,
Yes,
and it
she
comes
says that,
back.
doesn't she? I didn't know then that it was so wrong. Just, yeah, but
Yeah,
she
but
also,
I studied that also quite forensically.
yeah,
All those responses, I was dealing with things that weren't articulated at the time. So the conversation has moved on. But how do we look back at events of the past with our new vocabulary, and how do we describe them? So I had to describe it really from a kind of physiological point of view, what happened there. So it happens very much, it's a very embodied, that description. Nora is 10 years older than I am. So I was talking to a woman, and it's hard to find women in Ireland who had a gallivanting sort of time. But I was talking to a woman who's reared in England and is about the same age as Nora. And she said, but you always said no, and he always said you're lovely. That's what sex was. So that was interesting. That's what it was. So it wasn't that in my generation. So that,
and there's also another bit that is tortuously, amorally, brilliantly described, which is she goes to have a drink with this fellow, having slept with him a long time ago, and she says, "I knew by my second glass of harp, a drink that should be banned. It's the worst beer in Ireland. It was permanent. It was fantastic." And she says, "I knew that I was going to sleep with him again because the price I had to pay for having slept with him once was to sleep with him again." Now, there's very few people who would understand the morality of that, but I completely understood that.
well, what do you do with a mistake? You repeat it. Of course you do.
And
That's the only thing to do with a mistake. It's the only thing that'll fix it is to make it worse.
do it again. Oh.
I thought that was well known, Fiona. That's how you fix a mistake. You just wade right in there and make it worse. Yeah, that got an intrigued response from a few people who recognised it.
But in that you got the kind of inner soul and loneliness, not just of actresses, but of just people or students growing up in a city. And then dealing with people from a previous generation. There's another wonderful bit in the book. There's so much. I mean, readers will just feast on this. But the where you go to visit someone in England who's a friend of the mother's, and she had a wood pigeon voice. People don't have that anymore. It was such a brilliant description. Well, maybe they do. Maybe you know. But I just thought that was the most. I knew people with wood pigeon voices, and I haven't heard wood pigeon voices. I thought it was a period voice, a sort of softness.
Oh, that's a lovely thing to hear, because I was trying to get the timbre of what a period voice. I mean, I was just looking at archive recently of English people talking about cures for the flu. It's Richard Dimbleby going around. And they all said you just take a jolly big slab of goose grease. Anyway, but they didn't. They spoke in an antique way. They spoke like the patterns on the wallpaper have changed.
Yes.
And those are so delicious, those little shifts.
Yeah.
In dialect, it's almost dialect, and presentation, how you present as you speak. Yeah. Oh, I'm delighted you said that.
But I didn't know what you conclude. I don't think you have to conclude. You're just the writer. Is whether you had. I mean, given as I mentioned to you recently that we were the 2 generations later than this story. We were so trained and so not on top of it. Our lives were just chaotic, but we weren't nostalgically involved with the theatre in that way. And I wonder whether that was truly your feeling, or whether you were observing the nostalgia of the theatre. I mean, do
So
you think?
you're saying for you it isn't. You're going to take the dying swan line and say, what did she mean? What did she mean when by saying that nostalgia is contained in the fact of performance? You're saying you were just entirely professional.
I think
You're
by the time,
trained.
I think I was running away from that Irish tradition of the offstage life being about cigarettes and and general quotation of Yeats around a table. I was trying to think, if I don't throw myself into another, I need to be somewhere else where the imagination becomes the country I'm wandering around in, and not the imagination of the island that I'm in. But I
Quite
think
oppressive, the Irish tradition, for insisting that you're always in it. Yeah, well, I mean, you don't have any choice.
yeah,
Perhaps you do have a choice, but
yes,
or
well, kind of,
I
yeah.
try to remake it a little from the inside, but yeah, it's exile of a kind. Exile of the imagination is always very important.
Well, it's also, then I also admired it. I mean, you know, it also was the best fun, I'm sure, and you capture that in the book, that sitting around the table discussing the great heights of tonight's performance, whether it was any good or not, was a was part of it. I mean, the
It
problem.
was so racket, there's a rackety bohemianism, the Dublin of the 70s, late 60s, early 70s, and you just get that feeling that outside influences are beginning to liberate a very respectable, oppressively respectable society, and that there was a kind of there was a license given to people like Micheál MacLiamore and Hilton Edwards, who are Ireland's only gay couple for 50 years.
Yeah,
And it
yeah,
was always known, and it was allowed because Hilton was English, and therefore it didn't matter what he did.
yeah,
And also because they were in the theatre. So there was this quite intense space allowed in Dublin for people to misbehave. And it is in the pub culture of that of the male writers. Women did not survive this culture very well. I mean,
no,
they really didn't.
no,
And the women in the book who are there in their crocheted hats, setting their crocheted caps on a kind of drunk intellectual in the corner, or a poet or whatever, they are more pathetic figures. I mean, there is a feeling of quite a mean-spirited Catholic Ireland outside the door, and that they are having their fun despite all of that. And also beyond that again, behind that again, a kind of tradition of actors as being a tribe unto themselves.
yeah,
And that it goes before Irish independence, that the London and Dublin were part of the same circuit in the old days
yeah,
for actors.
yeah,
And so the fit-ups went then around Ireland. So it wasn't a national enterprise. They were all mongrels. They came from
yeah,
wherever. And they pretended to be Irish, some of them,
yeah, yeah.
as Catherine
Micheál
O'Toole.
MacLiamore did.
Yes, but if you wanted to be sane, you did take the plane or the boat, I feel.
Well,
I mean,
I think what.
certainly from that, it was, they died astonishingly young, some of
Yeah,
them.
yeah, and they didn't do a lot of good work. I think a lot of it was in the moment of a flash of inspiration. But I remember Imelda Staunton, who is half Irish. She went to Ireland because she wanted to rediscover her roots, and she did a play at the Abbey. And she said, because there's a pub called the Flowing Tide, is that right? Where they all.
Yes.
She said they all act like they're on tour all the time, but they're not. They're at home. She couldn't get over it. They're all sort of acting like we're free. In fact, it's just a Thursday.
Yeah.
Going on the 24 bus. And, but it wasn't good for work, because it wasn't good for discipline, because people were in a terrible state, physically.
But then they were within that physically, no, there wasn't a physical theatre. It was a verbal theatre for a very long time, very strong narrative, word-based plays. So you weren't getting people leaping around and doing trapeze work in the middle, and sort of taking that wonder was all in the voice. It was all, and the best of the Irish actors of that generation worked on personality and charm. They
Sure.
just had something that kept people in thrall, but it wasn't being able to shift from Chekhov to, I don't know, Dario Fo or anything. It was just being able to blather in exactly the. No, I'm not going to. No, I'm running out of.
In fact, Miss Adele has a more interesting heritage by the time she hits the Dublin stage than a lot of actors there who were only trained locally. I mean, she really had at least been.
Yeah, well, she learns. She's very much herself. I mean, there's an amount of Siobhan McKenna in there. Siobhan
I was
McKenna
going to
had
say, who
quite
did you have in
a
mind?
lot of discipline. She was a mathematician, among other things.
Yes.
She was maths graduate. I think.
Yeah. Her dad was
your mother was a physicist. I think her mother was a mathematician, Siobhan McKenna.
Yeah.
Did I read your mother was a physicist? Not to be too personal.
You'll be personal. She last night was telling me how hard it is to put on Netflix. So I don't think physics is exactly top of her achievements. And the toaster, she calls that thing.
Okay, well,
she was.
Yeah, no, my mother and the remote control have a very kind of, I don't know how the remote stays. Actually, it's just.
Yeah. Dishwasher is called the noisy thing. We marveled at her scientific previous life, but we.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, well, yes, at least my mother and the remote control. That's a whole other conversation. Nobody wants to hear about.
Let's get back to Anya McMaster.
Yes.
That touring group, which is the thing that I was also brought up on, that Anya McMaster had do these tours in the west of Ireland, and you even name rather brilliantly in the book. You name the places they all went to. You name Athlone and Tipper, and they were stopped off. And I think that must have been a very exciting thing to be part of it. Research that.
It certainly was, and I do remember people saying how exciting it was when they rolled into town and they put on Shakespeare. And Anya McMaster talked about the Irish audience, and I think he was actually talking about peasants in general, saying they didn't know what was going to happen, and that made it very exciting. But a lot of it was very patronizing. A lot of the anecdotes about people shouting out at the end of Romeo and Juliet, just give her a good shake. A lot of it was, aren't they lovable and stupid, the Irish, but they loved playing those audiences. And there was a mythology that they were super responsive to the word. And certainly when I was growing up, the Dublin dialect contained an amount of Shakespearean remnants in it.
Yeah.
There was a strong.
And when you work with young Irish actors, they're shyer than the English actors. And once they get going, they're much more brilliant with the language, much more. And they can spin it on plates. But that thing of people not knowing, the obvious classics of Europe. So despite a thing called, the Irish classics, in fact, the Irish classics were quite a small group of plays. When I did Hedda Gabler in Dublin, at the very end of the play, when Hedda Gabler, shoots herself, very often there were people shouting in the audience, "Oh no!" They absolutely didn't know the ending. And so suddenly you felt you were back in 1890 and the thing was and it was very exciting.
Amazing. But also the other thing is that Irish people talk to each other like they're in the middle of a big conversation. So you can be in the supermarket, before masks, and people would say, "Oh, it's all gone very expensive." And you'd say, "Yeah, well, that's fish." And then you'd go your way, or I don't believe in those peeled potatoes, or whatever it is that is available to be said will be articulated, and it's not it doesn't give anyone a fright.
No, so you mentioned that in the book, when there's a noise in the street, a bomb, and the fellow says, "Did you hear that?"
Yeah, and the guys, but so it's a bit the same with the a theatre audience that it's always women. They say, "Oh, she's for it now." They still sometimes bring sweets. We should really consider taking some questions.
You should do it.
We should, although there's so many things. You're going back to awards, Fiona. Where do you keep your awards?
I've got some here. I can show them to you. There's some there on the thing.
Okay.
I have some in the bathroom, but I'm very old, so I have
you've got a lot of awards. It's a storage issue, I'd say.
It's a storage issue.
Yeah. Americans love awards.
This has been so much fun. I'm almost sorry to interrupt, but we have some questions coming in from the audience. To audience members out there, if you have a question, please use the Q&A button, which is towards the bottom of the screen. Click on that, submit your question. We'll try to get to as many as possible. And of course, if you'd like to purchase a copy of Actress, look in the chat room, head to our website, midtownscholar.com, and purchase your copy. And for a limited time, we do have bookmarks and signed book plates from Anne that will come with every purchase. So let's get to it. Let's dive in. And Fiona, feel free to interrupt me, ask questions as well. Feel free to interrupt me at any time. But we've got some questions here from the audience. This first one's from Sarah. And Sarah asks, while the characters are fictional, are they inspired by any particular real life people? And we have another question from someone that asks, is Catherine Odell based on any real person? So we kind of want to combine those.
Yeah, and there's
questions.
a question here from Jerry saying Peggy Odell. There was an Irish variety artist called Peggy Odell, and indeed there was. She used to be on the Late Late Show, Peggy Odell. And so I was interested in theatrical families, and Peggy Odell's father was an artisan, and I can't remember what kind of artisan on the north side of Dublin, and Peggy was a child performer. So the question is, did I take the name Fitzmaurice? Maureen O'Hara's surname was Fitzsimon, and yes, of course I did. So I mean, everything chimes a little bit. I hope an awful lot of it is just stuff that I kind of absorbed over a lifetime, and then you just see, yeah. The day is long when you're writing. You go online, say Peggy Odell, yeah, remember her playing the piano, and so yes, there are as Siobhan McKenna, the book was engendered one day in a bookshop in America, and I was looking up Valerie Solanas, who shot Andy Warhol, but I was also researching that same day. I realized Siobhan McKenna, as written about in the New Yorker by Maeve Brennan. Maeve Brennan went mad. Siobhan McKenna did not go mad. And I thought, well, why can't I have someone like Siobhan McKenna who goes a bit mad, like Maeve Brennan? So you meld them all. And when you've got a character who's like at least 5 people, you think either it's turning solid and it's not going to work, it's going to be turned into a cliche, or I've got it now, because 6 people are going to say, I know that person. And I'm delighted, which is why I was so delighted that Laszlo Molnar kind of hit a central note there.
I met Siobhan McKenna once. I mean, she was exactly as you write about Miss Odell. People absolutely bowed meeting her. She was elderly, and she was very grand, and in a most delightful way. But she was so grand.
She had the voice.
Behave like that now.
No, she had a house in North Carolina that I passed on the bus on the way to school, and I saw her little bamboo chairs, or her little kind of delicate chairs in the window. Yeah. So that intrigued me. And her parents, her father was, or mother was a mathematician. Her son became a poker player. Oh, yes. So this is what happens when you live in Ireland, that you can get the same bus, okay? Yes. And you can uncover generations in your own, transport life or whatever,
I like this next question because it kind of compares and contrasts two of your novels. It's from Anonymous, so I don't know who it's from, but they said, I read The Actress several months ago and just last week read The Green Road. The voice of your narrator and The Actress was stunning, but The Green Road is quite different. Your comment about being forensic and revealing what you find in the characters, good or bad, helps me articulate what I liked about The Green Road and what is puzzling about it at first, because one keeps looking for a main character or the one to care about, and they're all mixed. Was writing the 2 novels very different? So if you could just kind of compare and contrast those 2 novels there.
The Green Road is a kind of democratic enterprise that each of the siblings has their own big section. So by the time they meet with the mother at the end, we know more about them than they know about each other, which is the way it is in families. Your siblings have a huge life they'll never tell you anything about. So you are going back to some very kind of old thing when you meet them that can be quite irritating. You say, no, I've done so many things since I was that person. So yeah, I mean, the actress is very centered in one relationship between a child and a mother. And there are 4 siblings in that, and it's from an outside point of view. And that was in the interest of democracy, I suppose.
This next question is for both speakers here. This is from Antoinette. I really love this question. She says, such a wonderful pairing. Do you 2 feed your creative narratives more from daily encounters or from others' acting and literature?
Fiona, what do you think?
Well, I don't know about daily encounters. Yes, I mean, certainly everything is quotation, and it's much better if the quotation is something you heard yourself. So nearly everything you speak, you've heard somebody say. In my case, it's often my mother. So it's, I end up going back to that. I just I find my childhood is fundamentally the CD in my head that really answers most questions.
Well, I find that I don't have a notebook, but I have a kind of magpie thing that some things become indelible. A little scene in where Catherine O'Dell goes into RTE, which is the national broadcaster, and she's not recognised by the security man. And her daughter wants to say, well, don't you know who she is? But she says, don't you know who I am? And actually, I witnessed that in 1989, that this happened with a fading, not very important sort of television personality, and the security personnel had changed. I went into RTE. I used to work there for 6 years. I went in recently and to do a bit on radio, and now it's a camera on a pole, and I pushed the button, and the camera on the pole said, Anne, good to see you again. You're looking well. And I said, well, so are you. You know, it is now a camera on a pole. So I would use a lot of real life when it's right.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to combine a couple questions here. This one's from Joan. They ask, when did you decide about point of view, and why did you choose the daughters? And then this other question kind of involves your other work, and said, you seem to be drawn to write about mothers and daughters. Could you please speak about this? So point of view, mother-daughter relationships in previous work.
So I'm just distracted by seeing names I know in the questions here, saying, I just want to say hi to Joe and a few other people there. Mothers and daughters. I don't know anything about it. But you're an expert. Fiona, mothers and daughters. You saw your mother on stage, which I think is incredibly.
Well, only as a 3-year-old. I didn't see her on stage much, but in some ways she's always on the stage. I mean, even as we speak, she's probably playing her piano now and singing. She said it's helping get through the pandemic. So, and I'm sure in her mind there's an audience of 50 in that drawing room.
Wow.
Yeah,
So
she
plays. It's not a bedsit guitar vibe. It's a.
No, and it's not even. I mean, she says it'll be for her own pleasure, but I have no doubt there'll be an element of
yes.
Mind that drawing room is full of people.
Wow.
She's always practicing for a thing called a musical evening, which is a very old-fashioned 19th century invention, but she's kept them going. She invites a few people around, they all come and play music for each other, but I think she just sort of paws the ground until it's her turn.
Yes, there were families in which you always had to have a turn.
Yeah.
Which my children are the most beautiful singers, perfect pitch, and not from me, and they won't sing, and it's like, the sun refusing to shine. I can't believe they won't sing, because the way I'm reared is you if you can sing, you get up there and you damn well sing. we weren't that family. There was no performance except me. I was the.
We're gonna allow ourselves one pandemic question. So this one's from Susan. Susan says, Anne, you had an event scheduled in Cambridge, Massachusetts about a year ago. It was the last event on my schedule before the world shut down. I'm wondering if you can talk about how the pandemic has affected how you have talked about actress and how you approach writing your next novel. Is Zoom just the worst thing ever, or are there upsides?
That's a great, but perhaps difficult question. That was the last event that I didn't have, if you know what I mean. And I cancelled it because I realized that there had been, I think it was called Biogenics Conference, and they were telling their people in Dublin, in the office in Dublin, to stay at home because there was infection. I said, why am I going to this place where this is where this happened? It just seemed to me that I was moving the wrong way, and I got it. So that was, we all had the shutters coming down. It was an immense clang at that time. It was really astonishing. And I'm doing a Zoom on wellness for the Arts Council in Ireland, because a lot of people are, and I'm trying to think of what to say. I'm working away now, thank you, and I feel that uncertainty is an artistic state if you can work the right side of it, and that people in the arts are more used to uncertainty, unfortunately, than others. So does that answer the question?
Yeah.
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 I mean, everybody. You know, I hope everybody's people are well. We've been well here, and I think that's what everyone's priority is kind of, you know, looking after the people they love.
I don't usually read comments, but I have to read this one real quick. This one's from Kate. Kate says, I was in high school when you did Medea, Fiona, and I remember an article about it in one of my dad's New Yorker magazines and ripped out that photo of you with the two boys to keep in my journal because it was so horrible and wonderful, and it set my mind reeling. I still have that page. Just had to pass along that nice little comment.
Now, Richard Avedon took that picture and he made us turn up in his studio, and we reenacted the whole thing with the children being held, bleeding. And we did it with him. He was a lovely man to know for a minute. Yeah.
We're getting to the end of our program, so we have time for just a couple more questions here. This one's from Shannon. Shannon says, as was mentioned in your biography, this is your 6th novel, and were there any unique or particular challenges in writing this novel versus your previous ones?
You know, it's not like stepping into the same river twice. I'm 5 years older than the last time. I have other stuff to bring. There are things like structural challenges that are actually getting a little bit technically easier. And I think in, you know, around book 5, 6, 7, 8, I start to enjoy it. I'm really much more grateful now because I'm doing what, I mean, I just realize how amazing it is to be able to do something that you chose. And I get into the swim of writing, and I lose the world in the way that people, you know, it used to be all anxiety and all terror. And now for me, I know that that state of flow, that when you're in there, which can be a little forensic and it can be a little bit cold. It's always interesting to pull back and look at that, but it's actually sort of delicious as well.
Why did you choose that subject of acting and that period? Why?
Always. Because you know, there was like 2 minutes where I was on the stage. I was with a group called Rough Magic Theatre in Dublin. We all hung out, and so I always wanted to do the theatre, but it was so full of its own stories that I didn't feel I could compass it really. So I wanted to do my theatre book. I mean, I'm with theatre people a lot. I love, and it was a kind of homage, you know.
This next question is going to come from Aaron, our moderator from the beginning. Aaron says, Fiona, so much of your work champions classic stories. An actress paints such a sweet tribute to the acting troupes of old. How do you think the tradition of telling classic stories can be reclaimed for women, and in parentheses, or more bluntly, pried from the hands of dead white men?
Well, classic stories actually are about women. They said that, you know, the Greek gods had said there's only one form of human life lesser than a man, that is a woman. And therefore, you know, Euripides and people, they took the weakest form they could find of humanity and they wrote a lot of plays. So a lot of Greek tragedies are about women because they're the weakest form of human life, and therefore are more open to the fates of the gods, and therefore more vulnerable to the fates of the gods and the pitilessness of the gods. So there's quite a good repertoire there for women to wrangle from the, you know, from the clasp of men. But I think that is changing for all sorts of obvious reasons. I think people now are no longer caught by the boundary of gender. I mean, that is a phenomenon that is only just beginning, I think, where women will start playing men and men women. I think in a way that is not commentative, but actually maybe explorative. Who knows? I really hope that when we come out of the theatre, out of this pandemic, the theatre will be completely different to the one that we were in before.
And this is going to be our last question to both speakers. This is kind of a popular question that we get, but This one's from Beth, and Beth asks, what is a book or books or author that has kind of profoundly impacted your career as a writer and actor?
Yeah, I read all the time now, and I'm like the chef who runs a restaurant, you know, thinking this dinner could do with a little more, you know, or less spice or something. I was profoundly influenced by being in the presence of, not being taught by, she didn't bother teaching me really, but Angela Carter is a wonderful, wonderful writer whose voice called me to UEA, which is the University of East Anglia, to do an MA in creative writing. She sort of waved her hand over my pages and said, "This is all fine." But just being around what she did was hugely enabling for me.
Fiona?
Yeah, I would probably put Angela Carter in there too, strangely, because of a certain period, Angela Carter was able to do this thing of being theatrical and yet surreal and yet real. And I was going to say two things. I was going to say Shakespeare and all the feminist writers of the early 80s. And it wasn't because I became feminist particularly after, but the combination of reading at that time was terribly exciting. You felt that you were making a new world. But Angela Carter is that writer.
We have to wrap up, but I want to thank Anne and Fiona here for joining us. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules. This was so much fun. Thank you to our audience. We had some really wonderful questions today. I'm sorry if we couldn't get to everything. Once again, just a gentle reminder, if you'd like to purchase Actress along with the signed book plate and exclusive bookmark, look in the chat room. We've provided a link there, or simply head to midtownscholar.com. We are shipping across the country and coordinating curbside pickup as well at the bookstore. But thank you again, Anne. Thank you, Fiona. I'd like to give you both the last word.
Pleasure. Great.
Such a thrill.
Wish we could meet more often. I'd love that.
Indeed. Here's to more planes.
Here's to more, yeah. Here's to more being in Dublin.
Okay.
Have a good day. See
All
ya.
the best. Thanks, Alex. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Bye.